Welcome to Pacific Mammal Research's Marine Mammal Highlight Series. We are a 501c3 research and education nonprofit studying marine mammals in the Salish Sea off Washington State. In this series, you will learn about different marine mammals as we discuss interesting facts about each species. This is our way to geek out, share some information, and have some fun. We hope you enjoy the series, and be sure to follow us on Instagram to vote for which animal we talk about next. And without further ado, welcome to the PacMam podcast. I'm Cindy.
And I'm Kat.
And we're excited because Kat is back. Yay! Kat got married. Yes. So excited. How was it? Was it great?
It was great. It was a little blustery. We had like the one weather day.
It was a weird day.
Was like cold and windy, but it was great. And we had a great time. And it was very awesome. So yeah, it was nice to have a little bit of a break to be able to enjoy some time with family and everything as well. So yeah.
And we get a sneak peek of the pictures, and they are beautiful. So we're very excited for Kat and her new husband. Very exciting.
So exciting. Thank you.
So Kat is back now. So we're going to be doing a marine mammal highlight. And this week it was between, was it the Fraser's dolphin and the Pygmy Sperm whale, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. And the overwhelmingly Pygmy Sperm whale, which I'm not really surprised about because
they're pretty cool.
Yeah, and I mean anything with pygmy, I'm just stick like.
That's true. Point.
I think I would just gravitate towards that. Like, oh, what is this little pygmy thing? It's smaller. Okay, let's do that. So it was like 70 to 30%. It was pretty big landslide. So we're gonna do the Pygmy Sperm whale today. Now, I'm sure Kat's gonna talk about it a little bit. There is the Pygmy Sperm whale and the dwarf sperm whale. And they are different. So we'll talk a little bit about that difference throughout here. But sometimes information is kind of smushed together with them because they're similar yet different. Both of them we don't know a lot about. So
yeah.
Heads up, this episode is going to be a lot of, well, that's what we know. But
if you have questions, we probably won't know.
Yep, nor would pretty much anybody else at this moment. Even the new research, that was one of the harder ones to find stuff on. Then I was
going to say I was really intrigued to see if you're able to find anything that was more recent. Yeah,
not too much, but we'll explain why as we go. So let's start off with Kat and where they're just what they're where they're at and what they look like, kind of thing.
Yeah, all those things. First of all, so again, we are talking about the Pygmy sperm whale. These guys were only recognized as a separate species in 1966. So previously they were categorized as dwarf sperm whales. Those have now been split into two separate distinct species. So we'll talk a little bit about in the appearance section specifically about what the physical differences are. And again, like Cindy said, unfortunately, we don't know a ton about these guys. They have a pretty wide distribution, actually. They're found in temperate and tropical waters worldwide. Technically, right? That's their range where, they could be found in any of the. They do prefer warmer waters. Typically they're found off of coasts or continental shelves. They do prefer deeper waters, which I'm sure Cindy will get into as to why they prefer those. In the U.S. specifically, the Pygmy sperm whales are found living off the coast of Hawaii, the Pacific Northwest. And of course, I read that and I'm like, well, I want to see one now because now you've teased me by saying that they could occur off of the Pacific Northwest, which is where we live.
No, they were over here.
I know. So apparently this is part of their range, the North Atlantic and the northern Gulf of Mexico. So there's a supposition that they might be more common off of the southeastern coast, as apparently there have been more strandings of Pygmy sperm whales in that area. So there's conjecture that perhaps that means there's more of them there. We don't know.
Can I say, I'll just do my little interjection here, Southeast Coast. I was in Florida and I got to participate in a necropsy of a Pygmy sperm whale.
I forgot about that.
Yes. It was sad though. We actually it did have to be euthanized. So it was stranded live. We had it in like a little baby pool. And it was we weren't going to be able to release it. It was sick. And so we had to euthanize it. So that was sad. But then I got to be part of the necropsy, and that was the first time I had seen the globulated kidneys that they have that looks like a thing of grapes, like most cetaceans have, to be able to have more surface area to process everything to get as much water out of their food as possible. But yeah, it was really neat to get it to see it up close. Because I don't think I'll ever see one in the wild, but who knows? But
Yeah, that's incredible.
yeah, it was a really neat experience to get to do that when I was a bit younger. So, and that was off
Wow.
Florida. So it had stranded on a beach in Florida.
Yeah. So I mean, it's interesting with that, where again, like we don't quite know if is it just because there's more strandings that happen there and it's not necessarily a higher density of animals? We don't fully know.
Yeah, could be
Um,
both either.
so yeah, exactly. So speaking a little bit more generally in the Northern Hemisphere in general, because obviously that was specific to the US, they live in waters around the Netherlands, Northwestern Europe, the Azores, Nova Scotia, and Japan. So again, these are, pretty varied locations. In the Southern Hemisphere, they can be found in the Tasman Sea and the waters around Chile, South Africa, and Uruguay. So kind of a little bit more of a belt area in the Southern Hemisphere. So now that we know where they live, what do they look like?
They're
So
so
obviously
funny.
they're so cute. So their name is Pygmy Sperm Whale. So as you might guess, they do have an appearance that is similar to a sperm whale, right? They have the squarish head, which is very definitive of a sperm whale. They have what is described as a small, compact body, which I love because they are kind of stocky looking.
Yeah.
They have a small and rounded dorsal fin, which I'll come back to in a moment, and a single blowhole. So the blowhole actually is slightly to the left of their head, and so this is one of the distinguishing features between them and dwarf sperm whales. So apparently it's just the pygmy sperm whale that has that left-centered blowhole. So if you see the blow of the animal and it's going off to the left, that's going to be a pygmy sperm whale, not a dwarf sperm whale.
Well, that's interesting because regular sperm whales have it askew.
They do.
Yeah. So it's weird that
Yep.
the dwarf don't, but the pygmy do. And on that, the two were separated. The dwarf and pygmy were separated by genetics in 2005, and they're all separate from the family of sperm whale. They're in their own family, not in the family of sperm whales, which is interesting. Even though
yeah, and again, it's one of those where like the name really comes more from the visual appearance, I think, versus actual like relatedness necessarily.
And that you can look a lot like something else and not necessarily be related to them.
Yeah, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So again, so these guys have a small, compact body. So we're talking about an average of about 10 feet in length for either sex. I found a maximum length of about 14 feet and maximum weight of 900 pounds, but that's on the large side. So again, mostly we're talking about 9 to 10 feet. Again, they have that squarish head, and it does say that apparently on when they're at the surface, because their head and back are relatively flat, right, not curved like other dolphin species, for example. The head can sometimes be described as shark-like because they have that sort of it kind of comes to a point a little bit in the front of the head because they have that squaring off. It's actually almost triangular looking in the front, and then they have a very narrow underslung jaw on the lower jaw. So that plus the dorsal fin, apparently they can often be mistaken for sharks. And again, that makes sense given their distribution and where they're found as well. I kind of did a double take when I read that. I'm like, wait, why? Like, really? Are you sure? Like, are you just not looking? But then when I was actually looking at pictures of them at the surface, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I get it.
I mean, the dorsal fin's a little bit more curved than shark. Sharks are pretty triangular.
It is.
But if you got the rest of it, you get confused out in high seas.
Right. And I mean, because these guys are quite rare too, I mean, you're less likely to see them than you are a shark. I guess you could also assume that you're probably looking at a shark and not a pygmy sperm whale. In terms of coloration, they have a brown to blue-gray back, with a paler underside. They have some white or pink tones in the underside. Slightly wrinkled skin. So again, that's just kind of a characteristic trait of this particular species. Their eyes were described as being dark and bulging. I was like, oh, that's an interesting way to phrase that. Yeah, that was interesting. But another reason they are mistaken for sharks is because they have a marking just behind the eye that is often called a false gill, because it's actually like a lighter line. And so from a distance, it can look as though they have a gill or slit right behind the eye. So again, that would be much more characteristic of a shark, for example. So it kind of makes sense if you're just at a glance seeing them that you might just presume that what you saw was a shark.
And I'm just I have the images pulled up because I was looking for one to put on the show, and There's one that's a decomposing stranded animal, but the
Hmm.
coloration for the decomposition and then the way the eye is and point of the nose, like it actually kind of does look like a shark from the side, especially because
Yeah.
it's just the headshot. It's just right there. I'm
Yep.
like,
Yep.
okay, fair enough.
And that's what I mean. Where like when you see the illustrations of them kind of out of the water and like the whole body picture, it's hard to imagine why you would confuse it as a shark. But when you see it, like you said, either head on or like when they're at the surface only and you can't see the rest of the animal, it is actually a little confusing.
Yeah.
Hmm. Um, One of the other things that distinguishes these guys from their cousins, the dwarf sperm whales, is that they have 10 to 16 pairs of teeth on their lower jaw. So that is different than the dwarf sperm whales. So dwarf sperm whales have a different number of teeth. And so this is, again, if you find a stranded animal or if you are looking at a skeleton, this is another way that you'd be able to distinguish which species you're looking at. The other cool thing with these guys is they don't really have teeth in the upper jaw. I found one source that said they can have like 1 to 3 pairs, but everything else said nothing. And as far as I knew, they don't have teeth in the upper
Yeah,
jaw.
they just go up into the sockets like regular like sperm whales.
Yeah, which is
Yeah.
really cool. So they don't have teeth, but they have these little holes, basically these sockets that the lower teeth fit into so that they can fully close their jaw. Fascinating.
I know, but it seems like also like it'd be so easy. Like they have to line up perfectly to open your mouth, close your mouth without like
I
gouging your
know.
gums with your teeth every once in a while. It doesn't fit in right directly.
Isn't that cool though?
Yeah, it is very neat.
Um, so again, these guys were not distinguished as separate species from dwarf sperm whales until 1966. Again, as Cindy said, genetically, they were confirmed to be different species in about 2005. But again, in the field, it's actually really difficult to distinguish which one you're looking at because they do look quite similar and their geographic ranges overlap considerably. So, you may not know which one you're looking at, but again, they're both fairly uncommon to see in the wild. So basically you're unlikely to see either one, but if you do see one, you might not know which one you're looking at, basically.
Even if you're an expert on split pygmy and dwarf
Yeah,
sperm whales.
yeah, exactly. But that's what I have for where they are located and what they look like. They're pretty cool. If you guys are not watching this on YouTube, definitely be sure to go look them up because they are really cool looking.
Yeah, very unique.
Hmm.
Yeah, they're like little, like rhinoceros, elephant, cetacean, something. Yeah,
Yeah, I
there's
can see
something,
that.
something about that. I think of more like rhinos or something like that when I look at their faces. Um, but yeah, so and it can adequately explained why we don't know much about them because they're really rare and we barely see them ever in the wild. So most of the information that we have, or a lot of it at least, comes from stranded individuals.
Hmm.
And there's always going to be bias to what we find out from those types of individuals because they're not necessarily representative of the population because they stranded and died for usually a reason.
Yep, good point.
Yeah, but that's why we know little, and especially because where they're at, like they're offshore, deeper waters. It's only been
Hmm.
more recently that we've been able to get out into those areas more regularly. And then even then, it's a freaking needle in a haystack. You're just
Yeah,
wander around the ocean and hope we see something.
yeah.
So so for diet, these guys, so the reason why they like to be far offshore is they can dive to at least 1,000 feet in search of food. And what they eat, the main thing is it's like sperm whales that like to eat squid, although sperm whales are eating like giant squid.
Hmm.
These guys are eating more, normally sized squid. But they eat cephalopods, which are mainly and so mainly squid, also cuttlefish, crustaceans like crab and shrimp, like the mantis shrimp, and various fish. Uh, they have limited number of how many individuals that they've done stomach contents for and things like that. I do have one paper in the new research that sheds a little bit of light on what they eat, but
Mm,
mainly it's thought that they eat squid is their main diet, and then they eat other things as appropriate.
gotcha.
Um, they oh, and that's what was it? What's it called? Um, they have there's a special term for it, and I had not heard this term before. They are toothophagous. So it's
Oh,
Teuthophagus. Toothophagous, and that means that they feed on cephalopods, octopus, squid, things like that.
Interesting.
I never knew there was a term for it.
I did not either. We learned something new.
Toothophagus, if I'm saying that correctly. I'm saying the phagus part right. I'm just not sure if the tooth though is correct.
Yeah.
But
Cool.
I thought that was cool. Yeah. So they feed in the mid and deep water environments as well as near the ocean floor. So they can, depending on how deep it is, they can get down there pretty close. Like their sperm whale cousins, they are suction feeders. So mainly they're slurping them up. But they do have those very small, few and small teeth that are sharply pointed and curved. And so when you see this picture, the picture of that stranded individual I was telling you about, you can see the teeth and they look sharp and scary. So I guess it's good to grab onto the squiggly little squishy.
I was gonna say, yeah, especially if you're trying to grab something that you can't just immediately like swallow straight away, or you're trying to grab the prey and then handle it a little bit first, that would be helpful.
Yeah. So how do they find their food? They feed, use echolocation like most toothed cetaceans do. But they don't, as far as we know, have other vocalizations. They don't know if there's any like whistles or coders or anything like that, like the other ones do. Just that there are echolocation clicks and they are in the ultrasonic range. So maybe it's, again, just like you take the sperm whale and then you made it smaller so the voice goes up. Like it's like a mouse.
You visual.
Right? So I found the description of their behavior is funny. There was some very interesting word choices, similar to what you were talking about with what they look like. They are slow, considered swimmers.
Interesting terminology.
I guess they consider their movements. I think, oh, I don't know.
Right? I guess, yeah, they're probably not really quick with how they move. Huh.
Yeah, it's just, it was the terminology that considered swimmers. I thought was it is very descriptive, but one I had never seen before. So, and then they had another one that says they are deliberate in their movements. So again, that goes with considered. They're not just doing things nilly-willy. Doing things specifically for a reason. So they'll rise to the ocean surface slowly and carefully, splashing very little. And as they make low, inconspicuous flows, and then hang motionless in the water for a while. Their dives are equally inconspicuous. They simply drop out of sight. So they don't necessarily roll like most dolphin whale species do, porpoise species, all of them. They'll roll at the surface. These guys just go like a submarine. You know what? They look like a submarine.
That's what I was just going to say. That's exactly what I was thinking when I was reading that about their dive behavior. I was like, they literally are just like a sub where they just come up and back down again. Yeah.
Exactly. And so that's also why when they're not seen often, but often when they are, they're seen logging, which is one of the more rare behaviors that you'll see cetaceans do. We don't see it a lot. So it's interesting that even though we don't see them a lot, we usually see them doing that just from the way their behavior is. I like that one. They said they're often seen logging, then sink like stones.
Pretty accurate.
Yep. They will occasionally breach. Apparently somebody lucky enough must have seen that happen. Like 3 people on Earth that have gotten to see that. But they can. They're generally found alone or in small groups of up to 6 or 7. I saw anywhere from 2 to 3 to 6 to 7. That was the kind of the highest one. And they can vary based on age and sex, but really we know nothing about their social organization.
Yeah.
Well, we saw a group. Yay! I have no idea who's in there. So they, again, spend very little time at the water's surface. They're usually diving a bunch. They almost never approach vessels. This was a very strongly worded, like they just don't do it. Interesting. And that's really a lot what we do about behavior. They dive pretty deep and they log at the surface, and that's what we got. They do have this
sense. Like if you think about where they live and just how difficult it is to observe them for any length of time, it makes total sense.
Yeah, and how much time it takes to dive, and then and it makes sense that if we see them at the surface, they would be logging because they're doing those deeper dives. You have to spend time at the surface to recoup, just like sperm whales do. So it makes sense, but still very difficult. And maybe they don't have much time for anything else besides diving. They have one really cool thing that they do. They do what's called the squid tactic. And this is a thing that only dwarf and pygmy sperm whales do. They have a sac filled with dark liquid in their intestines, and they can release more than 3 gallons of dark reddish brown liquid or ink from the sac. And that creates a dark cloud in the water to help protect them from when they feel threatened or trying to escape a predator. So they eat squid, and then they also pretend to be squid.
It's so cool.
Protect themselves. I know, right? That's like the other one. Was it a sperm whale that pooped and scared away the sharks? Was it that? Or killer whales? It was killer whales. I think it was a sperm
whales. Yeah, I think. I know minkies will use that as a strategy. They'll poop and basically like expel a cloud of feces and then run away. So they use a similar tactic, but they're just using their own feces versus having a specific ink sac, quote unquote ink sac. But yeah, fascinating. I just think that's
how does it evolve? And then like, what does that look like? Could they, because there's some animals that will eat something and then take the toxin or take whatever from that animal and then exude it out of their skin to be able to eat it. So like, could they be taking ink from the squid that they're eating and like stashing it away and then that's what they're expelling? Like what? Or is it just a liquid that they make? And then why? So they have that to be able to, so like for sharks or eating, and then they also think that the gill slit there is possibly an evolutionary tactic to make other things look like they're sharks so they don't get eaten.
That would also make sense. Because again, when you think about it, like they're about 10 feet at length, full grown, like that's not really that big when you think about it. If you're out on like in the those deeper waters in the tropical temperature waters, like there's a lot of predators out there that might be trying to get at you.
Yep. So it's good to have multiple ways to avoid that.
Yeah.
So reproduction and life, they can live, I saw a max of 17 or 23 years. So either way, kind of lower down. Sexually mature when they are 4 to 5 years, or other ones they saw that did by length, which makes sense if they're stranded individuals. They usually, if you see the reproduction done by length, it's usually from stranded individuals. Males at 9 to 10 feet, females at 8 to 9 feet. Mating and calving season lasts about 9 months, which I thought was interesting.
Wow.
Yeah. In March through August in North America. And then, or at least maybe it was Northern Hemisphere. Probably Northern Hemisphere. I may have written that incorrectly. The gestation is 9 to 11 months. And this is interesting. So they're kind of like porpoises in their lifespan. And then also the fact that females can give birth multiple years in a row. They can be lactating and pregnant at the same time. They found stranded individuals like that. And the calves are weaned after a year. Yeah. So
interesting.
Yeah. So they're kind of like a porpoise whale together. So yeah, that's all we know about the reproduction. Not surprisingly, because we've probably only seen calves. I wonder if anybody's seen a calf in a whole while. I'm sure somebody has, but
yeah, I would imagine not very common though.
Yeah, but they definitely know that they found stranded individuals that are pregnant and lactating. So and that seems to be pretty consistent information. So yeah, so we have little sinking submarine stones like log at the surface. And that's what I have for their behavior. And we don't know too much about them, but we will take a quick break and we'll come back with the threats and the little amount of new research I could find. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. So Kat, tell us about their how they're doing. I'm sure we don't know, but I'm sure we do know some things that could be.
Shockingly, yeah, in terms of their status, we really don't know. So these guys are listed by the IUCN as data deficient, which basically means we don't have enough information to know one way or the other if they are doing poorly or doing fairly well in terms of their overall population status. We really have no idea. Again, because they are not seen that often, they are presumed to be relatively rare, but we don't actually know. And as we know with other species, just because we don't see them all the time actually doesn't always indicate numbers and overall population numbers either. So it's a very vague we really have no idea what sort of population status and population level these guys are at, which is a little bit alarming. Like any animal that's a data deficient species, it's a little bit concerning because we really don't know what some of the threats that we'll talk about, like we don't know how those are actually going to impact the population because we don't know what the population is.
Kind of a problem.
So yeah. And again, as we already talked about, these guys are exceptionally difficult to study. I did find one source that said that they typically only come to the surface when the seas are calm and the weather conditions are calm, which makes sense because they're typically, as you say, doing that logging behavior, so they're resting. But again, out where they live, that's actually fairly uncommon to
No,
have those
always gonna have waves.
weather conditions. Yeah, it's just not very frequent. Um, so yeah, really we have no idea in terms of their status, unfortunately. We do, however, have some ideas as to what may be harmful to them. So one of the main threats that's been identified for pygmy sperm whales is entanglement. They are particularly susceptible to entanglement in trap lines, pots, and gill nets, which again makes sense. Anything that has a line in the water, they are more likely to become tangled in, pick up somehow when they are foraging, etc. And again, as we've talked about in previous podcasts, this can lead to direct death by drowning. So they get entangled and can't get to the surface to breathe. Or it can be more kind of indirect over time by accumulating lines or having injuries from being trapped in lines that impedes their foraging ability and ultimately results in poor health and death through kind of a more indirect route. Mm-hmm. We do know that these guys were hunted fairly significantly throughout the 19th century, and they're no longer hunted in the US, but commercial harpoon fisheries still exist in Indonesia, the Lesser Antilles, and Japan. So in those areas, they do still continue to take pygmy sperm whales through a commercial harpoon fishery. I didn't get any numbers.
Like economic things, you can't find them. Like even from just an economic expense.
I know, and that's the thing where I mean, and again, I don't know if this is like, is this something that they are part of? They're included in your fishing license for cetaceans, and so if you happen to get one, it's fine. Versus a targeted industry only on pygmy sperm whales. I would guess it's probably more of the former.
Yeah.
But they are commercially hunted in certain parts of the world still. So again, a little bit worrying given that we don't actually know what the overall population status is on these guys. As I say, I tried to find numbers on like how many were taken each year, and I couldn't find any numbers on that. But either way, taking animals out as part of a commercial fishery when you don't have a population estimate is not really just in general. Yeah. Interestingly, vessel strikes was also listed as one of their main threats, which I thought is interesting because they actively avoid vessels.
Yeah, but if they're logging and you don't see them.
Exactly. So it's mostly collision. Again, because they are relatively, as you say, they're deliberate in their movements. They're not super quick. Typically, and again, if they are resting at the surface and there's a high-speed vessel or anything like that comes across their path, they might not be able to get out of the way in time. So
I think particularly like manatees too, like it's the same kind
that's kind of what I had in my head. Yeah, it's a very similar context. And so again, whether it's injury or in fact death, they are actually very susceptible to vessel strikes, and there are certain parts of their range that are pretty highly trafficked by shipping traffic as well. So again, you have a large vessel that isn't necessarily going to see this smaller animal at the surface, etc. Yeah. The other problem with that is that does also then contribute to acoustic exposure and ocean noise levels. And so again, if you have high shipping traffic or just high volume of ocean traffic in general, their communication systems don't work as well. They can't necessarily orient themselves as well. They can't find food as well. So all of these things go into communication and foraging and socializing and life history in general being impeded by those greater noise levels. And that's just going to continue to increase, unfortunately, especially as vessel traffic continues to increase. And then finally, well, a couple more, I guess. Predation, we did already talk about that very briefly. Mostly it's killer whales and great white sharks that are predating on these guys in the wild. Those are the two main ones that I could find listed anywhere, which makes sense because they're small, but they're still a decently sized animal. So it would have to be something that's a decent size to go after it, I would assume. Yeah. So again, killer whales and great white sharks are the main predators for these guys. And then finally, marine debris is an ongoing issue, like many marine animals. Is this one of the new research ones?
Yes, it's gonna be
Your
perfect.
face, and I'm like, ooh, this will be good. Okay, so this is a good one to end on. So yeah, like and many marine animals that we've spoken about on the podcast before, these guys are prone to ingesting marine debris, especially in that deep scattering layer where they're foraging for their prey. They might accidentally mistake it for prey. They could just, grab it by mistake, incidentally, and then again, that can lead to injury or death. And some stranded pygmy sperm whales have been found with plastic and garbage blocking their, as it was so nicely phrased in this one source that I found, blocking their guts. So, we already know that it is a problem for these guys. And even though they're foraging in that deeper water, they are still being exposed to marine debris, and having issues with that. So again, unfortunately, that is going to be an ongoing concern into the years ahead.
Yeah, and that's, again, it's just very poignant, I think, that the deep ocean where like nobody goes, and there's still so much trash there. Like, that's the issue, right?
Yeah.
So with that, then, perfect segue for one of the new research, actually the most recent research that I have.
Oh, perfect.
Was from Brentano and Petri 2020, marine debris ingestion and human impacts in Brazil on Pygmy Sperm.
Perfect.
So it's fairly short. They found it was just with one carcass in 2010, but they did show that it had ingested 4 plastic pieces weighing 55.9 grams, which is only 0.12 pounds. But I wasn't able to see the details of what those plastic things were. They could be quite big, because plastic doesn't weigh that much.
Yeah.
But they did find 4 different plastic pieces in there. They had interaction with fishing nets, so that goes with your entanglement as well. So they, I think, had either interaction on the outside of the animal, or I think also likely inside as well, ingestion. And then they did do say something about the type of fish that they found in this one's stomach. It was the Merlochius hubsey fish. I don't know what that is. But that was in particular one that is the target of fisheries in southern Brazil. So the story kind of makes sense, right? Interaction with fishing nets. It had that fish. Fisheries go after that fish.
Yeah.
So they said that this work shows that in southern Brazil, the pygmy sperm whale suffers intense impact of both ingestion of anthropogenic materials and fisheries, and so must be closely monitored. So again, going back to your thing, like, we don't even know how many animals there are, and they're being impacted like this. It's a bad combination that we just don't know how much they're being impacted, because we don't know how many animals there are.
Yep.
So I'm trying to decide which way to go for the next one. I think I'm gonna stay with a gut. The next one is Irwin et al. In 2017. This is high diversity and unique composition of the gut microbiomes.
Ooh,
yeah,
fascinating.
So they used fecal samples from stranded pygmy and dwarf sperm whales. This is where, again, some of these papers are on both types of whales. So they took fecal samples. The core symbiont taxa, so symbiont is one that's hanging out with, they're both benefiting, were affiliated with phylogenetic lineages, so the ancestors of these types of microbes, that were capable of fermentive metabolism and sulfate respiration, indicating potential symbiont contributions to energy acquisition during prey digestion.
Wow.
So more than just that they have a gut, it's like everything has a gut microbiome, right? But these ones may actually have particular ones in there that it's like, I always think of termites and the bacteria that allows them to digest wood.
Oh yeah.
So they get something from they get the material food from the microbes. They can't actually eat the wood, but they eat the wood. The microbiomes break it up, and then the termites reap the benefits of that. So it's similar here, that the potential that maybe those gut microbiomes, beyond just living in the gut and doing some good things, are actually contributing to getting energy during prey digestion.
Wow. That's fascinating.
Which would make sense too if you're in this deep water environment where it may be hard to find food here and there. Like, maximize what you can get out of it.
Yep, absolutely.
The diversity and the phylum level composition, so almost up to the kingdom, talking about taxonomically, of these microbiomes in these pygmy and dwarf sperm whales differed from those previously reported in toothed whales, which exhibited pretty low diversity communities. So these guys, again, are different. They're different in a lot of ways than the rest of the whales and dolphins and porpoises. The community structure analysis revealed distinct gut microbiomes in the two, driven by differential relative abundance of shared taxa, so how much they had in common, and unique microbiomes in these cogid, the pygmy and dwarf sperm whales hosts compared to other toothed and baleen whales. And that was driven by the differences in that symbiont membership. So those more symbiotic bacteria stuff that they have. And so it indicates that host identity plays an important role in structuring cetacean microbiomes.
Wow, that's super cool.
Mm-hmm. We're coming out more and more of how important microbiomes are. We're talking about it more in human terms as well, but we've gone now into these and like how important all these things are. We just didn't realize, and there's reasons for it.
Yep. Yeah, it's fascinating.
It's very cool. Going along with foraging, since we're talking about eating, the Staudinger et al. 2013. This is foraging ecology and niche overlap in pygmy and dwarf sperm whales in the U.S. mid-Atlantic coast. They used stomach content and a combination with stable isotopes analysis between 1998 and 2011. So they actually physically looked at the stuff and then also looked at the stable isotopes in the stranded individuals to see where they're feeding on the trophic level, right? Which carbon they're taking in. This is the one that's told me that they were Toothophagus.
Okay. Yep.
They have 35 different species of cephalopods and 2 species of mesopelagic fishes in the stomachs that they looked at. And again, this is pygmy and dwarf. So there's some, but a lot of squid. It really hones down on squid as their main diet.
Yeah.
They had a high overlap between the whale diets, with squid as the primary prey. The pygmy sperm whales consumed slightly larger prey sizes than the dwarf. And that's why I was wondering, like, is pygmy or dwarf bigger? Which, they're both small, but which one's bigger than the dwarf? For the pygmy sperm whales, the prey size increased with growth. So as the pygmy sperm whales got bigger, their prey got bigger, but that trend did not hold with the dwarf sperm whales.
Interesting.
They just eat the same size all the time, apparently. So there was differences in that, but there were no difference in the nitrogen and carbon isotopes, even though the diet overlap was high. So they're basically both eating at the same trophic level, but different things.
Okay.
So the results suggest the feeding ecologies of the pygmy and dwarf sperm whales are similar, and both species occupy equivalent trophic niches in the region, but may vary, under that with exactly what they're eating, but at the same level.
Yeah. Interesting.
So there's some cool stuff that we can learn from stranded individuals. It's just limited.
Oh yeah.
Everything. Still going. Okay, I'm gonna leave that one for last. Yeah. So this one is Song et al. 2017. This is influence of air-filled structures on wave propagation and beam formation. Cool. I could only read the abstract for this. It was in Journal of Acoustic Society. So it's generally behind a paywall. For those, but I believe they looked at it in the horizontal and vertical planes of how the airfield structures affect the beam propagation, like the echolocation beam. It says the results were close to ones recorded for live animals. So I think they used probably some stranded individuals or something and did some kind of experiment and then matched, said that was similar to what they have recorded for live animals, just from that one sentence. So
okay.
I'm sorry, I don't know more. The abstract was not the greatest in terms of explaining the methods of what they did.
Interesting.
But the wave propagations and beam patterns, so looking at how the beam worked in the horizontal and vertical planes, showed the important reflection effect of the spermaceti, right? That's why they're called sperm whales, because they have that substance that helps them to focus their echolocation. So they're important in the reflection effect of the spermaceti and vocal chambers on sound waves, which was highly significant in forming intensive forward sound beams. The air-filled structures, the forehead soft tissues, and skull structures formed waveguides in these two planes for emitted sounds to propagate forward.
Hmm.
So basically, all those things go into their ability to focus the beam where they want to in front of them, the echolocation beam. And
Yeah.
So kind of cool.
That's cool.
The last one I have is Benitez Palomino et al. 2019, and I have to read you the title of it because it's new bulky-faced pygmy sperm whale from the late Miocene of Peru.
Bulky face? Oh, that's so unfortunate.
That's the title of the paper.
Oh my gosh. Really?
Yeah.
Poor thing.
I thought that was kind of sad. So what they said in this paper is the pygmy and dwarf sperm whales are remnants of a highly diverse group. And the past diversity of this family includes animals with very disparate ecological habitats. So there was apparently a lot more of these kind of smaller sperm whale type animals back in the Miocene. And so they discovered a new species based on a well-preserved skull from the upper Miocene strata of the Pisco Formation in Peru. It has a tubular rostrum with a hypertrophied mesorostral canal. So hypertrophy means like more, I think more tissue or more muscle. A large supracranial basin, so above the cranium, and a leftward deviated facial sagittal crest. But it differs by possessing a proportionately shorter rostrum, a reduced projection of the lacromojuggle. I don't know what that is. It sounds like I made that word up, but I did not. Lacromojuggle. Between the frontal and the maxilla, and a flat occipital shield. So occipital's one of the parts of the skull. So basically, apparently that's why they described it, a bulky-faced pygmy sperm.
Wow.
Yeah. The overall, furthermore, there's more. The overall rostrum shape and the reconstructed muscle insertion sites indicate that it retained some plesiomorphic features related to a more generalist ecology. So perhaps it was eating a more generalized food, prey items than the more specific ones we have now in the coded species. So they said inclusion of this into the context of the Pisco Formation indicates that during the late Miocene, the Peruvian coastal system was a hotspot for the diversification of physteroids, this family, with at least 4 species coexisting at the same time. And finally, it highlights that this particular one was a late Miocene diversity peak for sperm whales in the global oceans before the Pliocene Odontocete turnover. I have no idea what the Pliocene Odontocete turnover is, but it sounds very intriguing.
I was going to say, I want to go read about that now.
I know. I'm like, what is the Odontocete turnover? Does this mean like everything just changed during the Pliocene? Like, what's going on? That's very exciting.
Cool.
Yeah, so there's apparently more to these guys than we thought, and especially back in the day, there was even more of the different types of species of these animals. So perhaps learning more about them in the past will help us learn more about the ones that are here in the future. Well,
yeah,
the present, which is the future, if you're talking about the past.
Time's relative.
That's so true. So with that is the not bulky-headed, just regular pygmy sperm whale episode of Marine Mammal Highlight. We hope you enjoyed it. We had fun learning about these guys, and again, do take a look at them if you're not watching this on YouTube. They are they're very cool looking. So thank you again for all your voting. Be on the lookout the next time we do a Marine Mammal Highlight, which will be about a month from now. It'll be early in July. So you can help us decide which one will be done next. With that, remember that this is our 10-year anniversary this year, so we will be hopefully having some new logos and merch stuff happening in the near future. So take a look at that. In the meantime, check out our website and our merch store that has lots of awesome merch as it is now, and hopefully more merch as we get prepping for our 10-year anniversary in October. And also donate. You can subscribe to the podcast. That helps us with monthly subscription to produce the podcast and get it to you. And any donations that you make go straight back to our research and projects and helping us do our research and educate our interns and the community and do fun stuff like this in the podcast. So any way you can help, share, or donate, that's fantastic. And so next time we'll be with you probably for a journal review or a topic. Oh no, I picked out the next journal review. And paper just came in. That's really cool looking. So we have that one ready for you. But if you have anything that you guys want us to talk about, remember, please do email us or hit us up on socials. We'd love to discuss something that you want us to talk about. Let us know.
Yeah.
So I think with that, we'll talk to you next time.
Yeah. Bye. See you next time.
Bye. This was brought to you by Pacific Mammal Research, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. To learn more about the species we discuss, check out our blog. Head to our website, www.pacmam.org, that's PACMAM.org, to check it out. Also, help us continue providing fun and educational content like this by donating today. Your help is how we can continue to do our work and share it with you. Thanks.